All right, Dwight, it's great to have you back again after our last podcast. I'd like to just reintroduce you. So, Dwight Nordstrom with PRI, Pacific Resources International. Dwight's done more than 30 years in China, living in Beijing and other places, been a general manager of a number of factories. I believe 8 was one of the counts that I had, but I'm sure you've done a lot more when you're running them than that. You've been boots on the ground for many decades there in China and in Asia in general. And from PRI's standpoint, helping U.S. companies with Asia manufacturing as a whole. Anything else you'd like to add? I mean, we could spend a half hour
That's a
going through
good
the
start,
list.
and I'm looking forward to talk about what the U.S. government and China government is doing in this tariff and related situation. So,
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. And so let me tee that up. So you last week were in D.C., Washington, D.C., meeting with policymakers, trade advisors, congressional staff. That's what we're going to talk about today. And so let's just jump in. Like, what was the takeaway? What happened last week? Catch us
sure.
up.
So Jeff, is a little bit of background. For 17 plus years, I was chairman or co-chair of the American Chamber of Commerce China. And one of the largest or the largest sort of subgroup of that was the manufacturers. We had a manufacturing and sourcing forum group, and we'd have a couple hundred companies that were part of that group and keeping my pulse on it. When I came back with my family due to zero COVID in 21, we've had, Boeing's head of sourcing and one of the other PRI guys are now leading that. So American Chamber of Commerce China does a door knock in DC, and we basically, it's 5.5 days. Every day we have about 5 meetings. There were approximately 10 of us who were representing U.S. companies. Most are publicly traded companies you would know, from Facebook to Boeing to ConocoPhillips. And then you've got sort of PRI, which is a U.S. family, but we've had, 30 plus operations, mostly manufacturing in China. So we broke up into 2 groups, though sometimes we were together. And let me just go through a couple of the things and some of the takeaways. So, for instance, on Monday of May 12th, and by the way, we're doing this podcast on Tuesday, the 20th.
Absolutely.
And I just got back. So on May 12th, we met with the Naval Research guys. Looking there, the key issue is Taiwan. I would say my biggest takeaway from that is for our staff in Taiwan. We've told them that if there is physical war that China initiates against Taiwan, that we probably would not be able to get them out. The war games are such that if China really wants to win and take over Taiwan, it would have to do an all-out, massive physical war, assault, etc. The general consensus is that they would do it as a blockade, but that would substantially decrease their odds of winning. If it is a blockade, I think that planes will be able to leave. So that was one of the takeaways. We, of course, we met with Rand and many other think tanks talking about the tariffs. What was very fortuitous is that just on the weekend before we went, you had the U.S. delegation with Treasury Secretary Bessent and then Ambassador Greer, who negotiated a deal with China, which is in essence just a reset of what existed before. So we were at 145% tariffs. Again, these are rough numbers because different products have slightly different, of Chinese imports into the U.S. and China at 125%. And we have businesses, factories in both the U.S. and China, and feeling the pain. That at that level, it's basically a complete sanctioning of business.
Right.
Maybe our medical stent former business could survive with those type of tariffs, but not other operations. But it got reset. And so right now, you're going to hear different numbers, but let me just talk about our factories. In general, the tariffs that we're experiencing, that our China-made product to the U.S. is about 37% as we speak. Where was that prior to Liberation Day, April 2nd. Well, it was about 37%. Where was it in December of 2024? It was about 17%.
Okay.
Now, on the flip side, we've been quite successful in getting operations that we're connected with where the Chinese government has given exemptions for their tariffs. And so for most of the stuff that we were buying in the US, selling to China, we've been able to get exemptions. There was 131 categories of products, which, by the way, American Chamber of Commerce China was quite instrumental in getting on that list. But it's still, comparatively, it's there. I would say Tuesday and Wednesday, we had what was called a China Business Conference at the American Chamber of Commerce there, which is, if you know the White House, you've got Lafayette Park, and just on the other side is the Chamber of Commerce building. Was able to meet with Senator Young of Indiana. I will tell you, I left DC. I'm not a political animal by nature. In China, probably I am a little more, but not in the US. But I left with, particularly on the Republican side, we met with both senators on both sides and their staff. I would say that several of these were first term or just second term, and their interest in learning. I was also struck by, regardless of what you think the content of what they're doing is correct or incorrect or should be used more maybe surgically, the confidence, particularly of a couple of the executive branch appointed leadership, they're very confident in the route they're going. Mm-hmm. This is not a group in the current President Trump's administration that is not confident. They have a confidence level in the direction they're doing is right, even if it causes short-term pain. They think this is a necessary reset. The Singaporean ambassador, as an example, I think he categorized it well. He said, China is trying to keep the existing world economic order in order to upset the world political order, with the U.S. being sort of the dominant protector of maritime security, peace, etc. On the other hand, the U.S. is the exact inverse of that, which is the Trump administration is trying to upset the world economic order in order to keep the world's political order. Okay. And of course, then a Singaporean ambassador said, of course, for us, we're a small country. We try to play the middle ground. We want to keep the world's existing economic order, but keep the world's existing political offer. And I think, the question is, can you actually do that? Yeah. It is clear still that the combined U.S. and China economic portion of the world, so 200 countries approximately the world, historically, you really have not had long time periods where two countries are 40% of the total world economy. You have had time periods where one country, from Spain, Holland, the UK, US, had 30% or more of the world's GDP. Actually, China did for quite a long while as well in some of the previous dynasties. So I would say the most encouraging meeting of a senator was with Senator Daines of Montana. We met with him for about an hour. And for those of us in business, one of the things that makes Senator Daines great is he worked 6 years in China for Procter and Gamble. Okay. And so he worked in South China in the Guangdong province, and he was in China here earlier this year after the Trump presidency started. He's hoping to take another congressional delegation bipartisan, and I think he is playing an intelligent influencer on the Trump administration policies. And I'm grateful that we have senior leaders in the U.S. that have that. One sort of joke and a side comment, I think, our subgroup of 5 of us that met with a representative from Texas, Representative Self of, I think, the 43rd District of Texas. First term, Army guy. We met at 8 o'clock Friday morning. He's there bright and sharp. Nobody else is in the government building. Washington tends to operate not so much early morning, but later in the evening. And, we had a delightful interchange. And then so one of our groups said, and Representative Self, we invite you to come to China. And he looked and he smirked and he said, so are you telling me you want me to lose my next election? And so I think the cost politically of trying to seek some sort of working relationship for the representatives is very high. I will say, Senator Representative Self, I mean, he has, I think, a much more nuanced approach, and I think it's a good approach. So that's probably not a good thing. In terms of this 90-day reprieve that the U.S. signed with China, that ends the second week of August. The other countries in the world, that ends approximately second week of July, and no one's expecting some sort of certainly no one's expecting a big deal. The Chinese Communist Party is not going to change who they are. They're a centrally planned economy. And I would just tell you, having operated in China now for most of the last 35 years, one of my lessons is the U.S. government is now headed towards not a strict capitalism, but we're going to try and go into strategic industries and pick winners and losers. And we are going to identify, the number somewhere between 10 to 25 strategic industries: shipbuilding, chip manufacturing, AI, quantum. But it's going to go into other medical aspects. And I think you, as an owner of a U.S. business or as a strategic leader, need to look at these and say, okay, these are the industries that we need to have manufacturing capabilities in the U.S. Outside of that, or maybe 3 levels above in the supply chain, you don't. So in China, I'll just tell you, we read very carefully the 5-year plans that the Communist Party puts together and say, okay, this is an area. And so where can I fit in with that without basically getting into state-owned enterprise competition or corruption, which are 2 areas that we try and avoid. So those are sort of some of the lessons. And I would say one of the heartaches, I had a dinner at his residence with Ambassador Xie of China, very gracious man. And we had a delightful 2+ hours with several of us. I will say that he and I probably, he said something and a data point, and I said, that's not accurate. And when we left his house that night, he said, yes, the man who has statistics. and that was sort of a backhanded, but separately, I really appreciated quite a lengthy discussion at another location with their chief political officer for the embassy there of China and his person. And I just, so just to let you know, this was probably my strongest emotional time during the week, where China is using the 20% fentanyl import duty, which President Trump has declared on China, as a bargaining chip for trade negotiations. And, I just told him, I said, look at, what the UK and frankly, a couple other Western countries took advantage of now 175 years ago with the Opium War, which was where they forced open China to sell opium in exchange for silk and other things that China had to sell. It was morally wrong. But we've had hundreds of thousands of fentanyl deaths, and it is a moral issue. It's wrong to sell poison to Americans, even if it's a precursor. And I appreciate it. I think in the private meeting they heard that. I can't say it's going to affect Party Secretary Xi Jinping, but that is one that 20% of the import duties are going to come off if they're able to show some real action on that, and they can absolutely cut off the fentanyl precursor trade coming out of China. It's having lived there, the system there, you don't really get away with stuff, particularly in the manufacturing.
So I got a couple follow-ups on that. So with the tonality of some of those conversations, and by the way, this is awesome insight, stuff that most people would not have been, privy to, because a lot of it isn't coming through the news. But when you think about the tone, what do you believe is the effect of some of the political tonality to the manufacturing community? And I think specifically when you start talking about dates around July and August, as an owner, as somebody that maybe is working in this manufacturing community, the groups that are out there, the concern is I don't know what to do. Maybe I'm trying to move as much through right now because the tariffs have dropped. But what should I be thinking about as we think about
if you
the
can
end of
get
the summer?
stuff delivered before the second week of August, do it. Pay the 37%. Jeff, I think in our last conversation, I gave a couple ideas from bonded warehouses, both in China, third countries, or the U.S., where you're not actually paying the U.S. import duty until you draw down off of that bonded warehouse. You'd never want to pay import duties on either country for profit margins as much as possible. So you got to have legal entities in both countries and then pay out service fees. So you do not want to pay import duties on profit margins outside of a couple percentage. But the tone is, one of the things I talked to the ambassador about, and also to Senator Daines, was that I have lead time items for some of our special chemical factories in the power area that are 100 weeks. Okay, plus or minus a couple. 90 days is nothing to me.
Yeah.
And so it's like, come on, guys, we do need more certainty. Just tell us the rules. But I would say do not anticipate. I think what will happen in August is they'll kick the can down the road another 60, 90, 30 days. Okay. And, looking at some political, President Trump's not going to meet with Chairman Xi. Probably the early, something could always happen, but September, October, November. So, and so I think you have to understand the decoupling in strategic areas. You got to decouple. If you're a DoD supplier significantly, one of the takeaways is CFIUS, which historically it's a U.S. government group that has simply looked at mainland Chinese CCP investment in the U.S. CFIUS, that's what they evaluate. Mm-hmm. Now, the direction that's happening with CFIUS is they're going to look at U.S. investments in China. So one of the things that we have done as a family is we've actually gone to a couple of our tech partners. We're right now in the midst of one, a major supplier, and we're saying, you own a factory in China 100%. Let us buy that 100%. You will only now have a supplier relationship, and I think you're going to be much cleaner, much safer with their strategic industry sales in the U.S. and or DoD related. Simultaneously, we're a U.S. company. We will conduct the businesses with good corporate governance, everything else, and I'm hopeful that will go through. And so, but I do think in the decoupling, you have to look at China, not just for China market, but for much of the rest of the world. And clearly what is happening is China has not stimulated domestic demand so far. So this dual circulation, what they are doing is they're diverting exports going from China to the U.S., from China now to the rest of the world. Look at e-vehicles. I mean, you go to Mexico City now, you go to South Africa, you go to Egypt. Chinese e-vehicle are ubiquitous.
So it's really, and so this actually talks a little bit to what we talked about last time in terms of the country migration, right? So last time we talked a little bit about alternatives, Vietnam, India, Mexico. Has there been any change, or is there any change based on the conversations in terms of strategy around other players?
So again, I'm whenever you make a judgment, somebody can come back and say they critique me. We have decidedly chosen not to go to Vietnam and Thailand. Our China plus one strategies are Bulgaria, which is the EU, and secondly, the Philippines for a variety of reasons. Having said that, I would say make it in the USA. I think that is clear if it can be done. I think with automation and others. So trying to have a U.S. factory and then one operation inside the U.S. I don't think your problems in general are going to be solved by, okay, I'm going to move from China to Vietnam and I have a little bit here in the U.S. I think Vietnam is going to have a minimum 10% import duty. That may or may not be significant for your business, but I think made in the USA, particularly for certain leading strategic industry, a necessary requirement in terms of final assembly.
And then
again, the nuances, surgical, so what I just said, I don't want somebody to come back.
Well, Dwight said, "Hey, no,
deductive to inductive. It's got to be done well."
I always preface it. Don't do just Jeff said, and don't invoke my name. I get it. You still have to make some.
Oh, you can invoke my name, but we need more study. But you asked
Correct.
me. Here's a general trend. I would say that the trend is not just offshoring to another location outside of China, but really is, can you make it in the USA at some point?
And so you have to look at the industry, then you have to look at what your business is and decide if that's going to be the right fit. But general trend, that makes sense. When you think about, some of the other, you talked last time quite a bit about concerns around quality, right? So even over these next 90 days, last conversation, there was discussion around, hey, you had to let, people go, shut down factories for multiple weeks. Again, 4 weeks later, any change on that? Are we seeing the same thing?
Well, so after Geneva, one of our key customers for one of our factories reinstituted their PO, which was put on ice. And we brought back about 170 at that location. But on a quality issue, Jeff, I'll just say, I don't think, I haven't seen the results. I mean, that was just restarted. That was actually started our time Monday this week. So yesterday, the 19th, because Geneva was the weekend before.
Yep.
I'm positive we're not as efficient. Our suppliers, so we have multiple suppliers above and then our shipment below are the finished products. And I'm sure, so quality will be an issue.
And so, with that, we're talking about next 90 days. We're talking about maybe post the July, August situation. You've talked about a number of things. Is there anything we haven't talked about in terms of the checklist of activities a manufacturing owner president should be looking at here in the United States? We talked about the China plus one, some of these things, and hey, don't just go move it from China to Vietnam, those types of things. But
look, I am bullish on sales of U.S. made product to China. Why am I bullish? For non-strategic industries in China, where China doesn't have a suitable alternative at the right quality and price and delivery, if they're not on the 131 exemptions, we can get them on that. So they will not face a Chinese import duty, even if the trade war goes back up. Okay. But they got to talk to us, or they got to talk to the chamber. They've got to get their HTS codes in the system there in China. But China's been fairly responsive to that. There is no, at this point, remedial action for the U.S. outside of, I would say, relatively arbitrary, where some CEO talks to President Trump. Even Scott Bessent's not really taking these. So, and then President Trump decides, okay, I'm going to, exempt this type of thing, like, iPhones or whatever. So, but you've got to get somebody on site to look at the factory. And we've been, one of our customers is in the telecom, and we're like, we got to get back there. Their line was sort of down during this time. And so it's not going to be a lot, but spend $1,500 to get somebody to take a 4-hour visit and see what's going on. I would highly encourage it.
And I'm sure there's people already taking advantage of that, as we've gone through these last number of weeks, especially as things start to ramp up. When you talk about the what to do next, we talk about the 2025. Has anything changed from your mindset going into the back half of the year, which when we started the year, the U.S. was projected in the manufacturing community to be up double digits, like even talking 19%. Obviously, over the last number of months, some of that has changed. And with the back half of the year, there's still some positive sentiment that we are going to see some really strong growth in the back half, or better growth in the back half of the year.
Well, so, look, I read economists too, but maybe let me give you some thinking and even maybe some feeling from from the government people.
Yeah.
So I do want to say the Trump administration, and particularly the powerful Treasury Department, which, by the way, is right next to the White House. It's a magnificent. It's one of the more magnificent buildings and hallways, vis-a-vis some of the senatorial offices. Frankly, are run down. Um, there's a confidence level that even if there is a mild recession, that would be medicine necessary to get interest rates down, which of course is going to stimulate growth, particularly in the housing industry and certain other manufacturing industries. And also if it helps reset, again, what we talked about, the US is trying to reset the world economic order to bilateral relationships, versus, but keeping in the current political thing. I mean, maybe I'm pulling some fruit off the tree. Last week, unfortunately, and the Ukraine war really doesn't affect the world economy that much, but the number one beneficiary of the war continuing, unfortunately, is the CCP of China, with the diminishing of the armaments and the learning curve that's going on, and the West diversion from the concern about Taiwan. On the other side, to be very clear, what Party Chairman Xi Jinping said to his military was not that he would take over Taiwan in 2027. The task that he gave them was to have the capabilities to take it over. So, a lot of people are like, it's going to happen by 2027. That is not a correct statement, or not what he said. It was, he's demanding his military have the capabilities to do that. Whether or not they'll be able to do that, I think is still unknown, which isn't comforting. It'd be nice to have more of a definitive, from a straight. U.S. will respond militarily, I believe for sure, and Japan militarily, I believe for sure, if it is a military attack. I don't think I think South Korea is an unknown, but so those are just some things to think about.
And so as you're going through some of these final pieces, one of the things we talked about is this second quarter being one of these critical inflection points in everything that's happening. And one of the things as I'm talking to presidents and owners is this anxiety, this exhaustion of having to kind of deal with the yo-yo-ness and all that. If I'm hearing this correct, is it more of like, it's not going to necessarily go away, so might as well lean in and start planning for where things are going and start to work the plan as far as either your US-based manufacturing, those types of things?
Yes, but again, do that surgically, analyze carefully. Are you in a strategic industry? Are you in a parallel industry that has touch points to it, or in a non-strategic industry? Also, I think you have to lean in towards, is it not just sort of a nearshoring or offshoring to some other location other than China, but do you actually bring it to the U.S.? Our plan as a company is still primarily to both have U.S. manufacturing for certain things and to have China manufacturing. And that's typically right now able to handle the rest of the world. I do think if you have substantial sales, let's say 20% of your company sales to Europe, I think at some point, and if your U.S. entity is not the primary supplier to Europe, I think Europe and the U.S. are going to reach a deal. It'll be tough. It'll be one of the last deals reached, but they'll reach a deal. And they'll probably parallel what the UK has, probably a little bit more favorable to the EU, but you may need an operation in the EU, which is what we have done.
Any other points that we haven't touched on that you just would want presidents, owners to know?
Today, there's basic unanimity in the government on both sides of the aisle. So this is not a partisan issue. China and the US are adversaries. Full stop. So going forward, that's where it's at. China and the US are adversaries. Now, they are 40% of the world's economy approximately. They're going to stay that way for a while, maybe one or a couple percentage points down, but they will be the dominant economic powers in terms of countries for the next decade. And I think you need to be in both places with something: sales, marketing, installation, sourcing, engineering, some manufacturing. A phrase that the head of BASF, a German guy, Warburg, nice guy, great. He led BASF in China, billions of dollars investments in plastics and related chemicals. And he says, you need to be in China because it is a fitness gym. And when I talk about China compared to the US, speed, pricing, customization, all those things, China just kicks compared to the rest of the world. I mean, I talk about China's speed and engineering, and we want to, just Beijing alone, there's over 1 million university students. Half of them are in the hard sciences. I have an engineer, and we have partners in Minnesota, and they're Vikings fans, so they're not that smart. I'm joking. My wife's a Viking fan from small town Minnesota. You can laugh at me because I'm a Chicago Bear fan, but in China even. And so, you look for an engineer with 10 years experience in Minnesota, you might get a couple resumes, and then who's qualified? I have an open engineering position in China, 30 to 50 resumes of qualified people.
Yeah.
So you have to stay involved, and what I hope is that by having some economic changes in the relationship, the current sort of world order within the Pacific will be able to be relatively maintained.
Yeah, and so that kind of goes back to a quote I'd heard, from the trip, was policy isn't slowing down and the competitors aren't either. And so when you think about this, it's, sitting and waiting isn't necessarily the right strategy. It's being proactive and getting in front of this as things go forward.
Yeah, again, some summaries. If you're a Minnesota, Midwest company that's doing $25 million or more in business a year, and you're in you need to be in China in some presence, first of all, for the marketplace. This is part of being like what I call the fitness gym. Mm-hmm. Secondly, you need to be there to understand what your competitors, what your competitors are doing, and stay ahead of them and address the market. And the third is the innovation, the ethos, the whole eco structure of innovation in China is just so dynamic. And what I'll tell you is most of our operations, most of the new designs, most of the new incremental improvements is happening actually out of our China operations. Hmm. And so you need to be there for that.
Any final things you want to leave with the listeners?
No, but Jeff, 2 thumbs up to you and what the next step is doing.
No, I appreciate it. And I was actually going to say, if anybody needs, PRI has a free policy preparedness resource guide. So there's that resource there. We can attach that link. And then obviously, if anybody wants to get some consulting help with what they're doing in China, you're obviously available for that as well. So they can connect up through that. And it's really just going back to encouraging the CEOs, the presidents, the owners, as they're starting to think about this going forward, to take some stock, come up with the right strategy, and start to move forward. Again, the competition isn't going away and nobody's slowing down. So we just got to do that. And fortunately, the good Lord will work it all out, but that's where it'll be okay.
God bless the listeners, and looking forward to more dialogue.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
All right.